Hello, and on behalf of the Standing Committee on Professionalism and the Center for Professionalism, welcome and thank you for joining us for the first in a mini series of CLEs on health and wellness issues. We have designed a short series of three webinars, which will be rolling out over the next couple of weeks, and we're glad you could join us. A couple of just housekeeping issues. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A. If you have questions for our speaker today, if you would type them in, and if there's time at the end, I will ask those questions and see if we can have Justice Lawson answer them. Let's get started. I want to introduce Justice Lawson briefly because he's got a great presentation for us today, and I don't want to take up his time. Justice Lawson was appointed by then Governor Rick Scott to the Florida Supreme Court in 2016. He had a varied career and wonderful career both in private practice, local government, which endears him even more to my heart, and also as in-house counsel in a corporate setting. And we are so happy to have him here today to give us this presentation about the importance of health and wellness to the practice of law. Justice Lawson, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Judge Van Wyk. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm looking forward to this. I also look forward, as I think you do, to the day that we can do this again in person. It's odd staring into a camera and knowing that you're communicating with people and trying to communicate and make that connection. So looking forward to a time when we are in person. I'll get started by telling you how I got passionate about this subject of wellness or well-being. You've heard a brief sketch of my career. When I graduated from FSU's law school, I was fortunate enough to get an offer from one of the major firms in the state, a Miami firm. Still Hector & Davis was the name. It merged into the international firm of Squire Sanders and has a different name now. But for those who've been around Florida for a long time, they remember the name Still Hector & Davis. It was a really phenomenal firm filled with excellent lawyers who practiced at the highest level. But it was, for a young associate, a bit stressful. And I handled that stress fine, I thought. But really over time, and I spent 8 years at the firm. I was an associate and then a partner. And in my final years, I became pretty dissatisfied with my life. I enjoyed the practice, enjoyed the people I practiced with. I liked the kind of work that I was doing. But it seemed like I was just on this wheel going. I didn't have enough time for my family. I felt like I didn't have any balance. And I was stressed most of the time. It affected relationships, and it affected, of course, my quality of life and my health. And so I did the only thing I really knew to do, which was I viewed the job as the problem. And since the job was the problem, I needed to find something else. So that's when I went in other directions and ultimately was fortunate enough to become a judge. And it did work. When I spent most of that time between Still Hector & Davis and my first position as a circuit judge in the Ninth Judicial Circuit of Florida, Orlando and Orange and Osceola counties, with the county attorney's office, the Orange County Attorney's Office. And there I handled civil litigation, very similar to the litigation that I handled as an attorney. But in a much less stressful environment. So instead of the long 60 plus hours a week, I was spending about 40 hours a week working, and vacations were true vacations. I had one client, so I could look at that client and say, well, you've told me you want me to do these two things. Both of them can't be done at the same time, so which is a priority? And I had a lot of freedom and flexibility, and I really enjoyed practicing law in that capacity, and my stress levels were down, and I was healthier by every measure. Still dealing with things like acid reflux and that kind of thing, which are not uncommon in a high demand profession like that of medicine or law. But then I became a judge, and circuit judges, that's a pretty tense job at times. I had a busy felony division. So I was in court at 8:30 almost every morning, and in court all day and sometimes late into the night with breaks. Handled about 2,000 felony cases a year to conclusion, and that did not include violation of probation proceedings. Those were original felony cases, and so it was constantly going. And my stress levels were okay, but I wasn't enjoying life as much as I had actually at the county attorney's office. Although I loved the job, just totally loved the job. Then I got appointed to the District Court of Appeal, and I worked, I think, more hours as a DCA judge. I'm sure that I did. I mean, I would be drafting opinions at night or on the weekend, but the stress level went completely down. It is one of the most. It was a lot of judges who've had that job and ended up on my court say that the DCA job was the best job they ever had, because you really don't have deadlines as long as you work diligently. You'll get everything done in a timely manner, but other than preparation for oral argument, you don't have deadlines. And I wasn't in court that much. DCA judges don't have oral argument that often, about once a month, a couple days a month. And other than that, I could do the research, reading, and writing that I needed to do from wherever. I had arrived in the electronic age where you could work from other places. Prior to that, as a DCA judge, you had to be where the paper was all the time. But in the electronic world, it gave you a freedom and flexibility that meant for a really good quality of life. So my work, I think, improved because my stress levels were down, my relationships improved, and I began to enjoy life more. I remember so many mornings, I had a home office, and getting a cup of coffee and heading to my home office early. It was sort of outside. I walked from my house to the home office. It was almost like a pool house kind of thing. And I would sit there and start reading a brief or something and think, I love my life, which was not an experience that I had a lot in my prior jobs in the practice of law. Well, then I got to the Florida Supreme Court, and I will make it shorter by saying it was the most demanding job I'd ever had in my life, much more demanding than the private practice of law. And my stress levels went up so much. So in the first months, I was looking at my wife, Julie, and we were saying to each other, what have we done? It's a phenomenal job. It's a privilege to serve there, but the demands were really, really high. And unlike the first big career change that I had when I left the private practice of law in a big firm, it just wasn't an option for me. I was where I wanted to be, to leave and go do something else. So this is a question I asked myself. It was one of the most important questions I've ever asked in my entire lifetime. And it was, what do I need to know? And who do I need to become so that I can do my best, excel at this job, and still thoroughly love life and enjoy life? And that started me on a personal pursuit of trying to figure out what I was doing that wasn't working and what I could do that would work, that would allow me to have the quality of life that I wanted, the well-being, the personal well-being, and still do the job that I had and do it with excellence. And I can tell you that 4.5 years later, it has worked. I really am. Julie and I are enjoying our life with our kids and our grandchildren. I have what I consider now the best job in the world. I enjoy every aspect of it. I'm better at it because my stress levels are down, and it's really has worked. So what I'm going to share with you is, and that was that slide, is what I've discovered. And I'm going to start from a philosophical vantage point, because what I discovered, I realized, is something that I had rediscovered that was not lost on the founders of this country. Consider these words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness? Really? I mean, when you think about that in historical context, the signers of the Declaration of Independence were putting their fortune and their very life on the line. They were all accomplished people, and they and their families knew that if they pursued this course, if they signed that document and declared their independence from the crown, that everything that they had worked to build in terms of their life and livelihood was at risk. They would be traitors, and that could end in the taking of everything that they had and their death. And they said that they would do it. You can understand, vague notions of freedom and liberty and that kind of thing. But to pursue happiness, I mean, the way we view happiness, or I did anyway, was sort of entertainment. That was, what you could do for fun in times when you weren't having to work. Obviously, they meant something different. And then when you start trying to figure out what they were talking about, why they thought it was self-evident that you could risk everything to pursue happiness, then you start getting to things like great thinkers. The 16th century British philosopher John Locke, whose views shaped the founding fathers' views in terms of the social contract theory that went into building the Constitution, said this in an essay: "The highest perfection of intellectual nature lies in a careful and constant pursuit of true and solid happiness." I was asked recently for an article, how would you define well-being? And I really hadn't thought about that too much in terms of definition. What I came up with was something like this. It's really not something that lends itself to a definition, because it's something that you experience or don't experience. And if you experience, it can look like this. That feeling that I described when I sat down with a cup of coffee and just had this overwhelming feeling of, I enjoy my life. I like what I'm doing. My work is meaningful and I'm really enjoying doing it. It can also range from having a very, very difficult time, the loss of a loved one or something that's tragic, but meeting that demand of life with a peace that it's not what I'd choose. I wouldn't want this, but I can handle it, and feeling that emotion and all that goes on with it, and moving on without the stress that we so often think about when we think about those difficult times. Now, interestingly, Locke would say something else, and that is this: pursuing happiness is the very foundation for liberty. And that did not make sense to me at first when I heard that. It may be why the founders put that in the Declaration of Independence, because they understood that. And this is why I think it's true. If you think about it, hold on a second. Think about this. Democracy, if a society are going to live together free in a free society, what that requires is fulfilled people who are looking to meet the needs of others, to improve the world around them. That's the only kind of people group that can come together to make a free society working together. And sadly, it seems like the modern world is filled with needy people who are looking for everything and anything outside of themselves to give them true happiness and fulfillment or well-being. And that formula does not work. So what is the problem? You and I, or at least and I think that it's probably true of you. Hold on, I'm having a little technical difficulty. There we go. Grew up with really well-meaning parents who taught us really good things, like how to achieve, how to be successful, how to earn your way in the world. And what that does for us, it tends to focus us on outcomes. And we're rewarded, starting with early education, rewarded in the home before that, but we're rewarded for the outcomes that are deemed by our society to be positive. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But the byproduct is that what we think is, we begin to think that, well, since I was rewarded for that outcome, I'll be happy when I achieve another outcome. I see other people that have outcomes and they look happier than me. So maybe I need to achieve that outcome to look happy, to be happy. So things like, I'll be happy when I get the degree that I want. I'll be happy when I get the grades that I want. to get the degree so that I can get the job that I want. I'll definitely be happy when I get the job that I want. Well, you get that. It's called the hedonic treadmill. And it's that sense that, if I attain something or get something, for our culture, we're very materialistic, that it's a material thing. If I get the new car, I'll be happy. If I get the new house, the dream house, the vacation house, those things will make me happy. And within a very short time, sometimes hours, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, that new job, that new thing, especially if it's a thing, will just wear off. It becomes part of the normal background noise in your life, and you're looking at the next thing that's going to make you happy. The last one, but the back when I was living this sort of reality, I remember getting a car, thinking, oh, this is it. I've wanted this car for so long. This is great. And I was driving it away from the dealership and saw another car that I thought, well, that might be nicer than the one I had just had. I mean, so we have this crazy view that happiness is attained outside of ourselves. And when that doesn't work, we think, well, we must not be doing something right. So we move to the process. Maybe I just need to get better at doing what I'm doing to get what I want. And that doesn't work either. Happiness or fulfillment is truly an inside job, as was written about 4,000 years ago in a document. I can't remember what the name, called the Vedas. All that you seek is within you. And so that's where we got to start. We need to start. The ancients sort of had this figured out. The Greek philosophers, when they said "Know thyself," that was the signature, or the topped the temple of Apollo in Delphi, Greece, many years ago. And that's the journey that I began to undertake when I began to try to figure out how I could do the extremely demanding job that I had and still really, really enjoy life. We're going to start with let me just do polling question 1. If I'm talking to an audience, okay, good. I'm like getting immediate visual feedback. So I know that people are with me and whether I need to keep going or go on. And when not talking to an audience, I just don't know if folks are following me. So I came up with this question. And I can't see the chat, but if anybody has questions before we move on to the exciting stuff.
There aren't any questions at this time.
Very good. Let's go on. So what I found, most people are with me. There we go. Okay. What I found in this endeavor, the first thing I found is that I was freaking unbelievable and incredible. And the same is true of you. I mean, we have no idea how marvelous we really are. And I say that, let me just ask you this question. I don't have a polling question, but think about this. If I were to ask you what the most complex object known to exist on not only this planet, but in the universe was, what would your answer be? Usually I set that up pretty well. If I'm doing this in live and get all sorts of responses, I'll ask something like, how far would you have to travel to find it? Would it be, 100 miles, 2,000 miles, that kind of thing? But the answer is the human brain literally is the most complex object known to exist. Frequently I'll ask, also, when was the first time you think neuroscientists were able to do a high resolution map of all connections in a human brain? And the answer is, let me get rid of this poll here. Are y'all seeing the poll that's in my screen? Okay, there we go. Okay, thanks. Okay. And the answer to the question of when do you think scientists have done a high resolution map of the human brain is never. Think about this. There is not enough digital storage capacity on the face of the earth to store a high resolution map of all connections in your brain. In 2020, Google published the first ever high-resolution map of a brain, and it was a fruit fly. So that's how far away we are. And before we go a little further, I'm going to go ahead and launch the next poll. So if you could launch that. And I'm going to ask for some interaction here before we get started. First question, how many oxygen molecules do you think you inhale with each breath that you take? Which number is closer to the actual number? Okay, we're going to end that one and go to the next question in just a second. So almost everybody, well, let's see, 31% said 750 billion. Okay, can you launch the next question? Okay, we have how many red blood cells do we have? If you would end that and show the results. 44% said 750 billion. And go to the next question. How far do your red blood cells travel? What's the length of your cardiovascular system? So we have 60 miles, 600, 6,000, and 60,000. Okay, most people say 6,000. That's 32%. And go to the next question. We'll go ahead and show that result and go to the next question. Waiting for the next question. We'll skip the next question and get on with it. So the last question was, what's the circumference of the Earth at the Earth's diameter? So that was the next question. And we're going to answer those questions in a little bit. What we're going to do is look at the first thing that an emergency medical technician or doctor would look at, if any health practitioner, if they were going to assess you. And it's the very basics of what goes on in your brain and body. And Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am," and started this Western view that the brain is sort of different than the rest of the body. And we'll soon find out that that's absolutely not true. We talk about the number of neurons that we have in our brain. That's about 86 billion. Each one is capable of 10,000 separate connections. Each of those 86 billion neurons, about 10,000 separate connections. But the neurons don't stop there. They travel to every cell in your body and connect. So there's this electrical system that sends information from your brain to a cell to tell it what to do, and then back. There's feedback on the other way, and that's all regulated by what you see here. On the top is your pulse, your heart rate. And then you see your blood pressure. So if blood needs to go to a different part of your body, what's happening is the body will sort of squeeze it from one area where it doesn't need the blood. And so it's available in another area. So the oxygen's available in another area. And then you see oxygen saturation in the bloodstream. That for most of us is from 96 to 100% all the time. And then if it drops below that, we worry. And then the last one is your respiratory rate, which, for most average American is about 11 to 13 breaths per minute. Now to the questions and answers. So for question one, you have 27 quintillion oxygen molecules per cubic centimeter of air. And the average adult breath is about 500 cubic centimeters in a relaxed breath. So, and if you want to know what that is, take 27 and put 18 zeros behind it. And that's the number of oxygen molecules in a cubic centimeter of air. And then multiply that by 500 and you get the number of oxygen molecules that you take in. Every cell in your body has to have a continuous supply of oxygen or it will die, right? You have between 20 and 30 trillion red blood cells that circulate the 60,000 mile vascular system that you have. The circumference of the earth is about 25,000 miles, to put that in perspective. So every minute at rest, your blood circulates more than 2 times the distance of the circumference of the earth to get that number of oxygen molecules to every cell in your body to make you work. That's life. That's the way it works. It's astounding. And it happens all the time. It's happened from the day you were born. It'll happen until the day you die, and you don't even have to think about it. It's just automatic. It's one of the most basic parts of the autonomic nervous system. But that's not the part that affects our well-being in a transient way. I'll use that term. We essentially are hardwired for survival. And scientists have broken down the autonomic nervous system. We have the automatic functions that just happen without us thinking about. The heart beats, muscles move. You don't think about that. You just want to do something and it sort of happens. And breath happens automatically. You couldn't stop it if you wanted to. If you wanted to, anyway, to get on, you're hardwired to survive. And the way that system is designed is, and it's what they call the primitive or reptilian parts of the brain, what scientists would say is the oldest part of the brain. It's hardwired in there that anything that is a threat to in your perceived environment, so you have all these senses, and they're working at lightning speed constantly without you being aware of it to sense danger in your environment. And if there's any danger sensed in the environment, this nervous system will go in the direction. It's called the stress response. The sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, will start making biochemical and other changes in your body in order to respond to that perceived threat. So I think you're probably with me so far. And believe me, this is really, you think this is a departure from, wait, we're talking about well-being. What are we doing? I've come to believe that understanding how we work, who we are at the most basic biological level, is foundational to really understanding what happiness or well-being is. So bear with me. This is the way you're wired. This is the way I'm wired. This is the way we work. So environment, and when I say lightning fast, the brain, the conscious brain, the part that you're aware of, your thinking brain that you are consciously aware of, operates at about 40 bits per second. That's how fast you can process and deal with information, think creatively, write, that kind of thing. Your subconscious brain operates at about 40 million bits per second, literally 1 million times faster than you can consciously perceive. Your brain in the primitive area is constantly checking, if you have all the senses, every sense that you have, to sense for something that is off, and will react faster than you can think about it. I had this experience one time. I was looking the wrong way in London, where cars, from our perspective, we would say they drive on the wrong side of the road. And I, my mom had taught me, dad had taught me, look both ways. But I stepped out in London on a street and just habitually looked in the direction that the traffic would not be coming from. And I was looking in the other direction. And when I realized what was going on, I had jumped back, was on the sidewalk, and saw a vehicle go by, a cab go by. And it was like, it started to register. Oh my gosh, what did I do? I didn't even look in that direction. That could have killed me. That all happened before I could consciously know what was going on. You may have had experience like that in your past, but that's the way our survival system works. We are hardwired to survive. And the changes that happen, or that system is designed for this. It's designed to detect and allow you to meet physical demands, physical threats in your environment. Think saber-toothed tiger or lion chasing a gazelle. And every system, those that we monitor and those that we don't, is involved. Every part of your body is involved anytime there's a perceived threat in your environment. The autonomic nervous system will control every organ in your body, every cell in your body gets impacted whenever there's a perceived threat in your environment. And so there are results that happen as a result of that. And I want to talk about some of them. So what happens if your stress response, fight or flight response, is triggered, is that blood is taken from areas that it's not perceived by the brain not to be needed, and it's delivered to areas where it's perceived to be needed. Now, thinking that you're designed to face physical threats, that's the way you're developed. The place that the energy goes is primarily your major muscle groups. So your core muscles, your leg muscles, the glutes, and your everything in your thighs, your back and neck muscles, your shoulders. And it's why we get tense. No matter what the stress is, whether it's a physical threat or not, we react the same way. So your shoulders will get tighter and tighter and tighter because energy is going into those muscles. It's called the action potential of the muscle. It's like if you think firing a weapon, if you've ever done that, as you pull the trigger, it gets tauter, ready to just go. And your muscles, as energy's getting put in those, are like that. The action potential gets shorter and shorter as those muscles are just ready to fire. But they're not firing because you're sitting at a desk. And the stressor was a telephone call. It wasn't a lion. But that energy is going into those muscle groups, and you just are getting tenser and tenser. Where's that energy coming from? Where's that blood flow redirected from? Your blood pressure's gone up because blood had to be, taken from some areas, or the flow restricted to some areas so that it wouldn't be there for other areas. Think about this one. Immune response. If you're about to get eaten by a lion, the brain tells the body, well, we don't care about viruses and bacteria right now. Forget about that. So your T cell production, which is the beginning point for immune response to any virus or bacteria, is suppressed. Energy stops going there. Oxygen stops going there because the oxygen and energy are going to your major muscle groups for you to fight or flee. Make sense? Galvanic skin response. I don't totally understand this one, but we know that with the least any stressor, no matter how much, you have a galvanic skin response, you start sweating on your skin, or there's moisture production on your skin. One explanation I've heard is that if you're going to be eaten by a lion, you don't want to taste good, and that your whole system turns acidic with the cortisol and other stress hormones that are released, and that acid will be released on your skin with the galvanic skin response. It's what they use in lie detector tests to tell if somebody's lying. Even if somebody's sitting there looking as cool as can be, if they have a stress response, you can detect it with that equipment through the galvanic skin response. You can also detect it. Once I started getting less stressed in life, I would have days where I would not consciously recognize that my sympathetic nervous system had been triggered. I didn't feel stressed, but I would notice that I was stressed. And the reason I would notice is I would notice that there was a buildup of moisture under my arms. Where is it not going to evaporate? It's not going to evaporate when you're in a coat and tie and suit, and your arms are held down like this, right? So if I'd like spend an hour drafting something, and I'd realize that, hey, I've been sweating, and realize that, okay, I've had a stress response. That's the galvanic skin response, and it happens all over your body with any degree of stress, whether you notice the stress or not, or wherever not. Growth. Now, you may think, well, I'm grown. Growth is not that important. Of course, why didn't growth get turned off a long time ago? But by growth, what scientists, biologists are talking about really is cell development and cell growth. And all the cells in your body are constantly replacing themselves. How long do you think a red blood cell lasts, going almost 2.5 times the circumference of the earth every minute to 20 seconds? All the time, every time, carrying oxygen and hemoglobin? And the answer is about 4 months. That's as long as they last. So you are constantly reproducing red blood cells at a rate of 2 billion per second. That is normal growth function that's happening in your body. And if you're going to be healthy, it needs to happen like that. Otherwise, your cells don't reproduce. You know that the skin cells reproduce, hair cells, you're constantly growing. And so all of those growth functions are slowed down when you're in stress, any level of stress, and it affects that. The place that you notice it first, the cells in your body that get turned over the quickest, are your gut lining. The acid in your stomach is really, really severe. It needs to be to do the job that it needs to do, but that's really tough on the lining. So the gut lining cells are reproduced at about every 3 days. And so you can imagine that if you're under stress and there's not the energy available to reproduce those cells, you can start seeing things like acid reflux, which I experienced a lot in my life until I learned some of these things that we're going to be talking about. Or ulcers, stomach ulcers, all sorts of problems that we treat with medicine, but the cause is nothing more than oxygen being redirected from the growth function so that the cell lining can be properly regenerated to the major muscle groups where it's not needed when we're in stress. Here's one that's fascinating. One of the growth functions that we don't think about is our DNA. For cellular reproduction to happen, of course, it requires a DNA that's the coding that reproduces a cell. We probably all have heard that or know that at some point. And the end cap on the DNA, which they used to think was sort of junk, they didn't understand the purpose, scientists didn't, is called a telomere. But scientists did know that telomere length was associated with longevity. If you had a long telomere length, and it's sort of, once the telomere is gone, the DNA sort of, for lack of a better way to explain it, unravels. Think of like a shoelace and the cap on the end of the shoelace that holds it together. The telomere sort of holds the DNA together. So all your bodily systems that are generating new cells will do it as long as there's a sufficient amount of that sheath on the end of the DNA strand. As you age, that telomere length gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And when it's gone, you see really rapid decline. And you see this in folks who are older, and you just see them go like this. You also see it in folks that are stressed. You see rapid aging. Even things like, think about most presidents of the United States, when they take office and a year later they have gray hair. I mean, the rapid aging is going to be accompanied by a shortening of the telomere length. Well, scientists used to think it was just a function of how long and how well you lived. And the longer you live, the more that the telomere length would just shorten, and eventually, it would be your time. What they realized more recently is that there's an enzyme called telomerase, and telomerase grows telomeres so that they can get longer and longer and longer. But stress inhibits telomerase production because that energy is needed somewhere else. If you're about to be eaten by a lion, you don't need to be worried about your longevity. And that telomerase reduction enzyme is not produced in the same quantities, and your telomeres will get shorter much more quickly. So in every way, stress affects your health and your life, and it also affects your job performance. Stress makes you stupid. And the medical explanation for that vernacular is that one of the first places that blood flow goes from, your sympathetic nervous system, the stress response takes it from, is the higher thinking levels of your brain. You literally don't need them. You can't use them if the London street scene that I described. If I had waited, if the brain needed to wait for me to consciously register what was going on, for me to react, I would be dead, or at least would have been in a hospital. So you don't need those higher reasoning levels when you need to fight or flee. That's what the brain thinks. So it turns them off like that. So the more stressed you are, the more your judgment, your everything that makes you a good you in terms of your performance and your relationships and everything else literally gets turned off. Your peripheral vision closes down so that your focus becomes narrowed, and you just don't have the ability to reason well. And the more stressed you are, the lower your reasoning ability is. So stress literally makes you stupid. Now, on the other end of this spectrum is the parasympathetic nervous system, or what's known in the vernacular as rest and relax. No, I'm sorry, rest and digest. Rest and digest. Rest and relax are sort of the same thing, but rest and digest. And in nature, when an animal doesn't perceive a threat in its environment, then it goes into full parasympathetic. And in full parasympathetic, all the functions that get closed down under stress get the blood flows to those at maximum capacity, so that your cell reproduction is humming along as good as it possibly can, given your current state of health. Your thinking ability is as high as it can get, given your current state of health. Your everything is just working well. It's literally like stress is life-taking. The parasympathetic nervous response is life-giving to the entire organism. So when a gazelle escapes the lion, the rest of the herd, I've often thought in this picture that the lion could be over there 20 yards away eating the gazelle that got caught, and these gazelle would still be doing what they were doing because they would know that there was no threat in their environment. That lion had eaten today, and they would sense if there was another one around. And they just go back to happy, content, and rest. And the thing is, for all of its amazing capacities and our brain, our higher thinking function, what it allows us to do is predict future threats by evaluating past stressors in order to prevent the future stress from happening again. It's why psychologists say we have a negativity bias. Negative news is 20 times more likely to be repeated than positive news. You're significantly more likely to tune into negative news than positive news. Newscasters know this. It's why the news is almost all the time negative, because we're wired to look for threats so that we can prevent them in the future. The interesting thing about the brain is that if you're focused on a threat, past or present, the brain is firing a string of neurons that is exactly the same as if you were experiencing the threat, which means that if you focus on a negative experience, you'll have the same stress reaction as if you were experiencing the negative experience. It's how a method actor can cry on cue. They actually will put themselves in the scene to the point where there's no distraction in their brain. The only thing their conscious brain is focused on is that string of neurons that represents that negative experience, and they are there. And the body reacts exactly as if you're experiencing it live. I hope this makes sense. And so when we hyper-focus on something, let's say like coronavirus, and the possibilities that exist because we could be infected. If that's what we're thinking about day in and day out all the time, if that's what is presented to us all the time, it will put you in stress response as if you had it, really. I mean, you won't have the physical symptoms of having the virus, but the stress reaction would be exactly the same. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? That's what the brain is telling the body. And all these changes are taking place. And it's true with every stressor that you can think of. If you hyper focus on a negative experience that happened yesterday, it's how personalities are created. You have an experience. Somebody, you walk in a room, somebody knows something's wrong with you and they say, what's wrong? Well, this happened yesterday. I was in a car wreck. It was just horrible. I mean, this happened. This guy, he ran a stop sign. He was a drunk driver. He was this, whatever it is. I mean, you as you tell the story, your brain is firing the same neurons that happened when you experienced the incident. And as you tell the story, it's triggering the amygdala, the stress response center in the brain, to make these biological changes that we've talked about in your system. And you're, in a sense, reliving that. And in reliving that, it's causing the triggering of your sympathetic nervous system. That's the way we work. That's the way we're wired. And if 2 weeks later, somebody says, you seem to be off today. You seem to be in a bad mood. That temporary mood can over time become a personality. If you continue to focus on that negative or traumatic event, it will become who you are, a person who's stressed by an event. And we can do that to ourselves very, very easily. Now, so you understand that, but to really understand how this affects your emotional state, I'm going to turn to Antonio Damasio, who is, for a 10-year period, he was the most highly cited researcher in any field in the world. He's a neurologist, and a doctor. He treats patients, but he's also a researcher and heads the Brain and Creativity Institute at the University of Southern California. And I'm going to have him explain what an emotion is.
Is part of the key distinction you make between emotion and feeling.
Yep.
Well, why don't you describe what that is?
Okay, the volume's not working, so I'm going to explain what an emotion is. Oh, you can hear it? Okay.
Now, once these neurons begin to fire...
Wrong video. Here we go.
Is part of the key distinction you make between emotion and feeling.
Yep.
Well...
The video. Okay. Sorry for that. I can't hear it. So we don't really think about it like this, but the way the brain and body works together, if your subconscious senses a threat, and we see threats in so many things that are not physical threats, but if it senses a threat in the environment, perceives a threat, then the body has all these reactions or changes that I've described, and then it signals back to the conscious part of the brain, and we experience that whole that body reaction, neurochemical reaction that happens in the brain. All the biological changes are what scientists call an emotion, and then we feel experience those as feelings in the conscious part of our brain. So let me go down to this chart. So, for example, all of the fear reactions, the fight or flight, sympathetic nervous system reactions, the ultimate triggering would be just abject terror or fear. I mean, that's what you would experience as a feeling if the sympathetic nervous system was triggered to its max, or absolute paralysis and shut down. If the brain determines after sensing everything that I can't handle this at all, people actually can die from fright because the whole system will shut down. But mostly we just experience fear. But every other, what we talk about is negative emotions or unhappiness, feelings of unhappiness, are really nothing more than the brain recognizing that your body has made changes in response to a perceived threat in your environment. And every positive emotion, or what we would call the emotions of happiness, are nothing more than the brain registering consciously that the body's in a parasympathetic state. It's in a rest and digest state. And if you look at those, boredom's sort of in the middle, but you might have, I might say it, sort of the early ones might be really a better description would be just an acceptance or surrender that, okay, this is a situation that I am not really, it's not what I would choose, but I can handle it. I mean, that's a lower level, but positive, more positive emotion. And then you go to courage, happiness, optimism. There's conditional love. And then all the way at the top is unconditional love, which is really, really interesting. There's somebody that keeps raising their hands. Do I need to stop or? I don't know what to do about a raised hand. Okay, I'll keep going. If I need to stop, somebody here who's with me will tell me. Keep going. Okay. So oxytocin is what's called the love hormone or love chemical, and it is the produced at its maximum, like a lot of the other positive neurochemicals are about. They're, I think, 400 or 500 different neurochemicals that are involved in all this process, but oxytocin is what is it associated with that feeling of deep love and connection. And so it gets produced when you're in the maximum state of parasympathetic nervous system relaxation. And when that happens, I mean, if you've experienced it before, it's something like this. If you're like truly in love, if you can think back to a time, and I hope you've experienced this, when you were truly in love, it didn't matter what was going on in your environment. Everything is okay. Everything is fine. You could handle anything. You have all the energy of the world. You don't get tired. It doesn't matter what you're doing, working, studying, everything. You're just bouncing through life with this feeling of that is actually higher than a feeling of well-being. It's just a feeling of love of life. You actually love life in a deep, meaningful way. That is the ultimate triggering of the sympathetic nervous system, and that's how we feel that. I want to turn and talk about how we perceive, because all of this is based on how your brain perceives your environment. So let's talk a little bit about how you perceive. And I ask that you print out this this diagram, which is Adelson's checker shadow illustration. And what I would ask you if we were in person is to confirm with me, and I know that this is true, but I'd have you confirm that the tile marked as A is darker than the tile that has the letter B on it, which looks a little gray, but almost white compared to the tile that's marked as letter A. And so does everybody see that? Let's go ahead with polling question 1. Everybody agree that tile, that is what we perceive. Okay, so that's good, and we won't take the time to launch that, but everybody says yeah. Okay, the truth is they're exactly the same color. I read this in a book called Brain, about the brain, and I read that, and like so much information, you may, because I'm talking in a seminar and I said I got this from a book called Brain. Your conscious brain may say, okay, I believe that. They sure don't look the same. I'm looking at it, a piece of paper in my hand. But I saw that and I thought, that just can't be true. I mean, look at that. I'm seeing with my own eyes, and they're different. They're not the same. So I went online and found some YouTube videos where they sort of did this thing where they took the squares and they put them side by side. And I said, but that's camera magic. That's not real. So I went to the copy machine and I took that page and I copied it on my home printer and got a pair of scissors and cut them out and compared them. And I'm going to ask you to do that right now. So we'll go ahead and put poll question number 1 up. And when everybody has done that, go ahead and hit yes, but take your time. Do the exercise. Okay, we're about halfway there. This is so much fun to do this exercise in a group of people because you can see folks' faces. And my reaction when I did it was just like, I really couldn't believe it that my mind could fool me that completely. Okay, and most, we ask you late to get this stuff together. So if you didn't have a chance to do it, I'm telling you that this exercise will not be meaningful to you unless you actually cut them out yourself. Albert Einstein said that learning is experience. Everything else is just information. So I'm giving you a lot of information today, but until you start playing with it yourself and experiencing, that's when we really learn. That's when learning happens. So we'll go ahead and move on. And so the question I have is, so if my reaction to life and everything around me happens at a subconscious level based on my perceived reality, what is my brain doing to me all the time? And why can't I trust it? And that's the thing with this Adelson's checker shadow illustration. What's the explanation for why I can look at something and see it one color and it's different than what my perception is? And here's the answer to blow your mind. It blew my mind anyway, is that I already mentioned, and I had a video for this, but because of time, I missed it or just skipped it. But everything, a thought is a string of neurons that are firing together in your mind, in your brain. And what you see when you perceive is exactly the same thing, a string of neurons that are firing together in your mind. Now, there are different areas of the mind that are involved, the visual cortex, when you're seeing, but it triggers a string of neurons. What you see triggers a string of neurons. And when you see something or think you're seeing something outside of you, 20% of those string of neurons that are firing that represent what you're seeing in your brain, because there's no light entering your brain. What you see is a reflection of light that hits the back of your eyeball, your retina, that goes to the optical nerve that sends electrical signals into the brain. 20% of what you see comes from those electrical signals from outside of you, and 80% of what you see comes from stored memory. And so all of your life, you've seen checkerboards, and they all looked a certain way, and they all had, the darker squares next to the lighter squares in a certain pattern, and that's what your brain expects to see. And then Adelson figured out that you could put a cylinder on there and look something that looked like a shadow and trick the brain into thinking that it was seeing what it expected instead of what was really there. Now, that's a crude explanation for what's going on inside your brain, but it's an accurate one too. So most of what we perceive, even when we're seeing what's right in front of us on a piece of paper, is based on stored memory. And neuroscientists call the brain the major unexplored territory left in the universe, and say that we know more about the stars than we know about our own brain. But we do know this, that we really can't even fully trust what we see with our own eyes, because the brain contains, they believe, a record literally at the subconscious level of everything you've experienced your entire life. And if you see something and it reminds the brain of something like you saw before, that whole system that's looking for threats in your environment could trigger something, and you may have no idea why it's happening. Let me give you an example. Here's a study from, I believe, Harvard. What fires together? So they took a bunch of students and they had them interact in a controlled environment with an individual with a similar script, just a basic conversation, right? And what they found was that if the person that the subject was interacting with was holding a warm beverage, then at the end of the encounter, the subject would describe the person as being warmer, nicer, friendlier, and the whole exchange as being a better, overall more positive experience. Exact same experience, except the control person was holding a cold beverage, and the brain registers that. And in surveys afterwards, they talk about it in less than warm terms. I mean, not that it was a bad exchange, but it's just it's not as warm, not as good and warm an experience. Does that make sense? So what's happening is you don't consciously recognize, you may not even recognize that the person's holding anything. You're engaged with their eyes, you're talking to them, but your subconscious does. And you've somehow judged warm is good and cold is bad. Most of us have. And so in this perceived environment of a conversation with somebody, you perceive them differently based on that thing that you're not even aware of. It works the other way around too. They did a follow-up experiment where they had students describe and talk about their mothers. And the same person, same mother, same experience, they describe that person, their mother, in warmer terms as kinder and all of the attributes that we think of as warm if you gave them at the beginning of the interview a warm beverage. And in colder terms, if you gave them at the beginning of the interview a cold beverage. Isn't that fascinating? That's the way our brain works. That's the way we are wired. So I had a personal example of this when I went to buy a plant for our backyard when we lived in Orlando. And we needed a hedge. And we were at the nursery, my wife and I, Julie and I, and we're looking around, and I described that I wanted something that was easy to maintain, that would grow, that would provide a good hedge, a good screen, and that it was warm, was cold hardy, would handle the cold well, didn't need a lot of work. And she said, "Look, a podocarpus, that's exactly what you need." And I looked at that plant and said, "That is just ugly. I don't like that plant at all." And she said, "Well, most people like them." And I said, "I know, I've never liked those things." And so we started to go on. And then I had a memory, and I said, I remember when I was growing up that my parents had a podocarpus right next to the garage, and that thing was big and it had to be trimmed. And in the summertime, I was the one that had to get there in the heat and trim that thing. I hated doing it. I'd rather be playing. This was when I was a kid, right? And I had been studying this stuff at the time, and it just, the light went off in my head, and I realized that I was connecting that negative experience with that plant. And that's the way I looked at it and judged it as an ugly plant. Well, the lady said that happened later. The realization happened later, after the nursery worker said, because I conveyed the story. She said, "Well, you don't have to trim them. A lot of people like them, just they're naturally shaped really nice." And I looked at that, and I didn't know what was going on. But when that sort of string of neurons disconnected, you don't have to trim it, you don't have to do that work. All of a sudden, I looked at it with new eyes, and I said, I actually do kind of like the way it looks naturally. And we ended up buying 3 and planting them and enjoyed them in our yard. But when I had to disconnect that string of neurons with the negative memory for me to see it clearly for what it really was. And it was only later that I realized what was going on. So the more we learn about the brain and how it works and how we perceive, the better we're able to be objective and see the world as it really is. but I have a whole separate lecture on that. So that's a different topic, but it's important to know and realize. So here's the question. Knowing what we've talked about and assuming that it's true, and you can do your own research. I mean, I've done a ton of research, but everything I've told you is, you'll find it in neuroscience textbooks and anywhere you look, that this is really the way that you work, that I work. Then we sort of, here's the question. If we had a choice and we could live life more in those upper range emotions of happiness, fulfillment, well-being, or we could live life more in those areas of unhappiness, including as far as depression and panic attacks and all that, which would we choose? And do we have a choice? And what I found is that we do have a choice. What we're talking about really is our emotional state. And I probably should have gotten rid of that quote. It's a really good quote. Inner peace begins the moment you choose not to allow another person or event to control your emotions. That's probably for a different time, but I want you to focus on what's on the right here. Our emotional state is determined by three things. It's determined by our focus. It's determined by our physiology. And it's determined by our language. And most importantly, what I'm talking about here, language, is the internal dialogue. It's what you're telling yourself about yourself and about your perceived environment that you may not even be aware of. That language, that subconscious chatter, and sometimes conscious chatter, frequently conscious chatter, self-criticism, self-doubt, when it's talking about yourself, criticism of others, judgment, all of those things, that's what I'm talking about with language. So if you can start to gain more control over your focus, over your physiology, and over your language, then you can begin to choose your emotional state. And it's not really that hard, except that we're creatures of habit. And we live the same habitual thought patterns today that we lived yesterday, and they govern our actions, our thoughts, and our well-being unless we do something to change them, unless we create new habits to change them. So it's about creating new habits that will allow you to maintain control of your focus, your physiology, and your language or inner chatter. So this is, if we were live, I'd say, what do you see, the duck or the rabbit? And it's called the duck-rabbit illusion. Not too creative there, but if you look at it, on what's my left-hand side, you see what would be the bill of the duck or the ears of the rabbit. And then the eye's the same either way. And then the other sort of rounded part is either the nose of the rabbit or the back of the head of the duck. So there are a few people that once they see one of those can only see that one and can't see the other one. Most people can see both, but we'll see one at a time, one first pretty clearly, and then they can look and see the other one. But here's the thing. Your conscious brain can only focus on and see one string of neurons at a time. And it's a slightly different string of neurons that you're focused on if you're seeing rabbit than you're seeing duck. So neuropsychologists say that you can see both and you can rapidly go between them, but you can't see both at the same time because it's a different set of neurons. You're either seeing rabbit or duck. Does that make sense? So you can use that to your advantage. We can use it to our advantage. We're going to talk about focus first, but before I get there, because we are running out of time, it's physiologically impossible to be stressful and happy at the same time. And you now understand why, because happiness is a set of feelings that come from emotion, which is nothing more than your body's reaction to your brain's perception of your environment. And you're either in sympathetic or parasympathetic. So if you're stressed, you're not going to be feeling feelings of happiness. And if you're at rest, you will be feeling feelings of happiness. And it doesn't matter what's going on in your environment. You can feel a level of peace in the most difficult times if we can learn to control our focus, physiology, and environment. So focus. What are some tools? Relationships. So I have the most amazing spouse that you can imagine. She really is phenomenal. She's incredible. We've been married for 33 years, almost 34. It'll be 34 in June. And I am generally very happy with the relationship. But I can make myself very unhappy with the relationship. She has countless positive qualities that I'm privileged to be able to enjoy a lot anytime I'm with her. But she tends to be a little sloppy sometimes. So, she may leave her shoes on the floor. And that's been true throughout our whole relationship. And so I can get myself into a place where I really don't enjoy the relationship at all if I start focusing on that one negative trait. Can't she pick up her shoes? Good grief. I picked those up for her yesterday. You can focus on one thing that's negative, and all of a sudden everything about the relationship, because you can only focus on one thing at a time. And if you're the string of neurons that you're firing about someone is negative, then your relationship with them and your feelings about them will not be positive. I hope that makes sense, right? So I can choose to change my focus. And I'm going to give you some resources at the end. One comes from Hal Elrod, and Hal Elrod, when he was early in his career in sales, he had a boss who said, okay, this is the way we deal with negative emotion, because a negative emotion will affect your performance anywhere in the practice of law, in your relationships, at home, social settings. It affects everything, and it bleeds over into everything that negative emotions do. So the boss said, we have a 5-minute rule. If you experience something that you judge as bad, you can be negative about it for 5 minutes, but after the 5 minutes, you need to focus somewhere else, right? So that's a good rule. With something like if you're in a situation like mine where you have a really great spouse or friend or coworker or something like that who has a few traits that bother you, then use the 5-minute rule. I mean, if they do something that bothers you, you can focus on that for a little while. You can take corrective action if you need to, or help them do it. But the better thing to do is you can't do it from that negative space, right? The only way you can do it is from a positive space. And the way you get there is to change your focus and focus on a positive trait. Circumstances, exactly the same way. You can get focused on the negative about a job, and that'll happen if, say, you're up against a deadline, maybe maybe it's your fault. You procrastinated, but you're up against a deadline, and all of a sudden you're stressed because you have something that you get done. And if you're focused on that particular task that you've been procrastinating on and the feelings that you're associated with because of that, then you're going to hate your job. And the more you focus on the negative aspects of a really good job, the more you're going to hate it. If, on the other hand, you focus on the positive aspects of your job, and that's where you spend most of your attention, you're going to enjoy what you do as a general rule. Things in life, we tend to focus on, and it's a negativity bias, what we don't have. And we live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We have more than almost anybody who's drawn a breath in the history of the world. I'm not talking about the wealthy people in this country. I'm talking about working class people in this country, even the lower class working class people of this country. We almost guaranteed that no matter what your station in life, if you are living in America today, you have eaten better in the last 24 hours and slept more securely in the last 24 hours than the vast majority of people who've ever lived on this planet had an opportunity to eat or rest. And we don't think about it. We don't have gratitude for it. What we focus on is that somebody else has a nicer car, or I'll be happy when I get this, or I'll be happy when I get this. So if we can learn to change our focus, and psychologists agree that the best tool for doing that is a gratitude practice. So if you don't have a gratitude practice and you want to greatly improve your emotional state, just start focusing on, in a systematic way, in the morning, at night, something new that you have to be grateful for, and start controlling your focus that way. Physiology. Physiology is a branch of biology dealing with the functions and activities of the living organism. So we've been talking about that, but there are bridges to your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. There are bridges to your autonomic nervous system. There are automatic processes that you can make not automatic and control. The first one is your breathing. So for example, it's impossible to be stressed and not stressed at the same time. And it makes sense to me, it should to you, that if your feelings are a result of your brain registering what's going on in your body, if you want to change your feelings, you can take control by changing what you're doing with your body. So we're going to practice that right now. And I'm going to ask you to sort of sit up straight wherever you are, move a little bit. And this is called a 2 times breath. And what I'm going to have you do is breathe in for a count of 3, about 3 to 4 seconds, and then breathe out twice as long. And we're going to do a few breaths like that. So if you're ready, we'll start now. Breathe in, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And how do you feel? If you did the exercise, you'll feel more relaxed than you did before 3 simple breaths. That's a bridge between your conscious brain and your subconscious or autonomic nervous system. And so if we learn some simple techniques, we can instantaneously change our state of being by controlling our breath, our posture. There's a fantastic video by Amy Cuddy, Harvard professor. It's her TED Talk on posture. And the research shows that if you, before a job interview or something like that, you take an upright posture like a Superman or Wonder Woman pose for 2 minutes, that's your body telling your brain that everything's okay. I can handle what's about to come. And then students would walk into those interviews or walk into that test or whatever, and their performance level was statistically higher than if they had not done that. Take control of your posture. So you can create a practice like every time you walk through a door, check your posture and make sure that it's upright, because that is your body telling your brain you can handle what's about to come. Movement is so important, and I'll give you a resource for that. I don't have time to get into that, but I said earlier that, well, it does matter how well tuned your body is. So if your body isn't particularly well tuned, you can do all these short-term things, but your perceived environment is one in which your body's telling your brain, I can't handle a lot because I don't move well. I don't, whatever. And so to get control of your movement, or in traditional terms, it's get in shape, but that traditional terminology, brings up going to the gym and doing all this stuff, which you do not have to do to be able to move well. And we'll be sending you some resources that'll clue you into how to handle that. And then chemical is one way to change your physiology, your state. And it's the only tool that most people in our society really have. So we go to alcohol or things that are illegal or legal but very dangerous. And it's why you see headlines like this. I mean, people are desperate to have a sense of well-being. And if they don't know how to get it any other way, they'll try other things. And those are very destructive. And then, so we've talked about physiology, we've talked about movement, and we'll talk about language or belief. And here's the question: do you have empowering beliefs or disempowering beliefs? And a belief is also a string of neurons that's very hardwired in. It's something that you've thought and you've thought and you've thought and you've thought over and over again. We don't have time to go into all the neurobiology, but essentially those connections there's a glue-like substance that gets them stronger and stronger and stronger. And when you're under stress, you always go back to the strongest connection string. So when you start a practice of changing beliefs that are disempowering in favor of beliefs that are empowering, you won't see benefit at first, because even if you start doing things to put the new belief in place, it takes a lot of non-use for that old string of neurons to sort of disconnect from the amygdala, where it's going to trigger the stress response, right? And so until that happens, if you start to get under stress for any reason, you're going to go to your disempowering beliefs. So let me give you an example in the time that we have left. Here's one that, most of us have a worldview. Einstein said that the most important question that we'll ever answer is the universe good? Because if you believe that everything will be okay, as it says on my right, I'm not sure on your screen, or that God is good and he's looking out for you. Some of you believe that, or maybe say that you believe that, but don't really believe that. You may believe on the left side. And that's a cartoon. Timing is everything. The moment they relax and stop waiting for the other shoe to drop, I'll let them have it. I mean, a lot of people view life like that. We're just waiting for the next thing to go wrong. And that produces a life of stress, constant stress. If our perceived environment is one in which you have to be constantly alert for the next thing that's going to go wrong in my job, the next thing that's going to go wrong in my relationship, the next thing that's going to go wrong, if that's the mindset, then you're stressed in a way that things will always go wrong, because you really don't even have the processing power to experience much else. So I'm going to end with this video by Srikrama Rao, who has taught at Columbia University's business school. He had the most popular course there, went on to teach at 5 other London School of Economics, other business schools around the world. And he taught essentially how to control your state to these business students, and they ate it up. So it was really popular. But he talks about one model that's similar to what I've been talking about. So here we go.
The benevolent universe model. Albert Einstein said, the most important question you will ever ask yourself is the universe friendly? Most of us believe that the universe is indifferent. It doesn't know we exist and couldn't care less. But what if the universe does know you exist and was well disposed towards you, and the universe always gave you exactly what you needed for your growth? It might not be what you want, but it is what you need. Imagine you're a small child and what you want is a tub of ice cream, and what your parents give you are fruit and vegetables. You don't want fruit and vegetables, you want ice cream. And it's only when you have a much greater level of understanding and maturity that you can say, thank God I got fruit and vegetables rather than ice cream. What if the universe was like that? It gives you stuff, it's not stuff that you want, but it's exactly what you need for your growth. Regardless of whether or not you believe the universe is friendly, if you believe the universe is friendly, your life would improve dramatically. There are things that you can do to believe the universe is benevolent. Just look for examples that it is. And as you look for examples that the universe is friendly and well disposed towards you, you will find them. And the more you collect them and the more you ponder on them, the more an internal shift happens in you until you really believe the universe is friendly and your life has changed.
So there you have it. I've noticed in my life, I can start a day and everything is going right, but I don't pay attention to that. I mean, I wake up feeling refreshed, don't really pay attention to that. Get up, I turn on the water to brush my teeth and the water works. All this water just comes out, and I have toothpaste that I bought, and and I have a toothbrush, and 1,000 things can go right on the way to work. And then I get in traffic, and if 2 other things go wrong, maybe the coffee maker didn't work the way it was supposed to, that would be one. the third thing that's gone wrong, you've forgotten, I've forgotten that this was the way I used to be. All the things that went right in favor of the things that went wrong. And all of a sudden my attitude was like that. And my state of being was negative, and it affected my performance. And we're all the same. I'll tell you the way the human brain develops. We have an amazing number of neurons in our brain, 86 billion. And you were born with that many. You don't grow extra ones. You're born with that many neurons in your brain. What you're born without is connections. And those are developed primarily in your early years of life. From age 0 to 6 or 7, you form these views of how the world is and how it works. Is the world really a friendly place, or is it not a friendly place? And if you form a view that it's not a friendly place for whatever reason, then that's a belief that's not serving you well. So if you just adopt a practice like looking for ways throughout the day, like Srikar Maharaj said, for proof that things are working out, things are good, and start focusing on those things, you'll begin to change the language that goes on inside your head. The last one, and I'll end here, is that for some reason, our society produces a lot of people who at their core sort of think, I just don't measure up. I'm not enough. And instead of the extreme confidence that we should have, given the extraordinary being that you are enough. The only thing that stands between you really and a fulfilled life is some time learning to reprogram yourself to understand that you can handle what life brings you, and you can handle most of it with the higher emotions of peace, of joy, and you can fall in love with your life. So I hope that this has been helpful, and I see we're at the end, so I'm going to stop now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Rebecca Bandy, and I'm the director of the Henry Latimer Center for Professionalism. On behalf of Judge Van Wyk and the Standing Committee on Professionalism and our Mental Health and Wellness Working Group, we want to thank you so much for being here today, Justice Lawson, but we also want to thank all of our attendees. We really, really appreciate you, and we will make sure to get the CLE number, credit number out to everyone as soon as possible. And we just appreciate this message so much. I was taking notes and was learning a lot of wonderful information. Judge Van Wyk, did you want to add anything?
I just wanted to thank Justice Lawson again for a fascinating and thought-provoking presentation. It lived up to all the hype, I must say, I had heard about this course that you're teaching, and I wish we could go on for hours, but we can't. And we will get an email out to everyone who registered with the number so they can get their credits. And thank you again.